Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to another installment of Golondrinas Live Sessions. I'm Laura Gonzalez, the Education and Volunteer Manager here at El Rancho de las Golondrinas Living History Museum. We're located just south of Santa Fe, New Mexico in the beautiful and historic La Cienega Valley. As most of you know, we've been closed the majority of our season, and all of our major weekend events have been canceled, but this weekend would have been our Renaissance Festival, and that festival is our largest festival and our most widely attended. And some of the more popular displays at that event are, of course, the weapons displays and the hand-to-hand armored combat and the jousting. So in light of that, we thought we would talk today a little bit about the history of firearms and black powder. So joining me today are longtime Las Golondrinas volunteers, Larry Markin and Gordon Mark, to share their expertise. They're going to show you all about the different weapons that they've got. They've got both replica and historic firearms, and they're going to be showing you a live demonstration of black powder firing. So if at any time you have questions for Larry or Gordon, go ahead and put those into the comments. All right, gentlemen, the stage is all yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I am Larry Markin, and I have been asked, outside of our regular curriculum here, to mention to you that there's a sign there to the Torreon. The Torreon is a very special exhibit of ours, a Torreon that was actually excavated with help from the National Park Service a few years ago. People often miss it when they come to visit us. Should you be able to come to visit us, that's a place you won't want to miss. But now, black powder. So normally I would ask visitors, what is black powder? Normally somebody would say, oh, it's gunpowder. And they're right, except that when black powder was in use, it was the only type of gunpowder. Nowadays we also have modern smokeless powder. But this is the composition of the first type of successful powder, and it was not smokeless. It produces a lot of smoke. Basically, what you have is you have never, ever modern smokeless powder, because modern smokeless powder expands at a much higher rate in a concealed chamber, and so it is very dangerous. If you fire black powder weapons, never use modern smokeless powder. So that is black powder. Well, we're going to be talking about muzzle loaders. Well, what is a muzzle loader? A muzzle loader, as opposed to modern weapons, which load at what's called the breech, loads at the muzzle, that is the front end here. This particular weapon that I have here is of the type that would have been carried by the early conquistadores. It's known as a matchlock. It's not the first type of weapon or gun, but it's the first type that actually had what is called a lock, a firing mechanism. And so it is a muzzle loader. When a muzzle loader needs to be armed, first of all, the powder is poured down the barrel, and then the load is put on top of that. And then you would use a ramrod to compress everything down. You need priming powder. In this case, there's a priming pad. Additional gunpowder would be placed here and then closed. The reason it is called a matchlock is because of this. This is match, not like a modern match, but simply a smoldering cord that continues to smolder as long as it is lit. When a soldier or an individual went into the field, usually he would carry his match like this. Just before going into battle, he would light one end of it. It would then be placed into what we call here the serpentine or the cock. And just before going into battle, he would then light the other end so that he would have two burning ends just in case needed. When he was ready to fire, remember we've got a charge with the ammunition inside of the barrel. We have gunpowder also in this little chamber. This has to come down right on. Remember, this is supposed to be smoldering, right? And so by pulling, in this case, the lever, and yes, they eventually did develop triggers, it comes down onto the powder and ignites it, which then travels through what is called a touch hole, a little tunnel, to ignite the main charge. That then is a matchlock, the type that the conquistadores would have had. Much larger often, but the same general type of weapon. And then we move into the type of firing mechanism that had the longest lifeline, I'll call it that, of any of those. Well over 200 years, individuals were using the flintlock mechanism. The flintlock mechanism, a lot of times people hear this, they don't necessarily understand exactly what is meant by it. But the flintlock mechanism is named after the rock. The rock is fixed right here to the cabinet or the top. And then this is called the prison, also known as the steel. In this case, it's a muzzle. This being, you recognize it, right? It's a blunderbuss. A type of gun that everybody associates with the Pilgrims, but highly unlikely that the Pilgrims actually had these. In fact, at the earliest, they were only developed in maybe about the 1630s. This type of weapon was very popular with individuals for defense. For instance, coachmen, or in the Navy they liked it, and that's one reason that often the brass barrel was used. It's lighter, and also it doesn't rust. But as I mentioned, this is the flintlock mechanism. Here's the flint, the sharpened rock. Again, loaded through the barrel with a ramrod. First, the gunpowder, the black powder, and then we have, of course, whatever the ammunition would be. It may be lead balls, it may be a bullet that actually fits the chamber. Priming powder then goes right here inside of the priming pan. It is closed, and in this case I'm actually going to try and get a spark by firing this. True, we won't have a true firing of the barrel itself, but it may give you an idea of how it works, even if it is, let's see, now hopefully you saw the sparks there. That then is the ignition for the powder in the pan, which then ignites the charge in the main barrel. That is a flintlock. Sometimes individuals, when they look at a blunderbuss, they note the short stock. But if you remember, I said it's mainly a defense weapon. Also, it was used sometimes by pirates. The short stock is not meant to be held like this, but think how easily it can be held like this by, say, a coachman who is transporting goods in, of course, a coach. One type of flintlock. And now, perhaps the type of flintlock that most people are familiar with. This is a Kentucky pistol here, using the same exact type of ignition for it. In this case, we do have, as I mentioned before, the flint here, the frizzen. When a gun like this is loaded, you'll notice that this is the type, let's get this little piece of paper out of here. That's going to be my bullet in a minute when we live fire. But the bullet is actually smaller than the barrel itself, and it would roll out. So what would usually be used is a greased patch, so that when this was fired, first the powder, then the ball and the greased patch would be put through it. As an example, this is a bullet block, and the bullet block has bullets on it all ready to go into the barrel. The patch is already in there, ready to go. Another thing you might wonder about, well, what about the ammunition for these guns? Well, whether it's the ones that I'm talking about, or even some of the models that Gordon will be covering in a minute, a lot of times you did not go to the store and buy bullets. You made your own. Here is an example, an historic type example of the type of mold that you would use. Here's the bullet, the round ball, the same as what I had a moment ago. A nice little ladle. See how this thing swings out here? Okay, just like that. You would melt your lead then over the fire. There's an opening here. You could put a stick in it because this thing's going to get hot. It's going to get hot fast too. And what you do, you buy bar lead. This I got as a straight bar. I've got it bent over simply because it fits nicely into the carrying case that I've got in it. But as you know, lead is very malleable. That is to say, it can bend quite easily. All I have to do is chop off a piece of this, either with maybe a sharp knife or a tomahawk, and then put a small bit of it inside of the ladle. Perhaps then, using a stick on the inside, this can be held on the edge of some very hot coals. And by the way, you also will want to heat the mold itself. If you don't, it chills too fast. There's kind of like a funnel-like opening there on the end, so that it'll accept the lead more readily. So you get your lead that is melted. It is then poured carefully. There'll be a little bit of spillage. So you know what you're going to do? You're going to have a piece of wood beneath it so you don't lose that valuable lead. In fact, you know, lead was so valuable in the past that sometimes that might be one of the prizes at a contest of shooting. Maybe the third place person, maybe he would get to claim the lead that had been used in the shoot. That's how valuable it was. Well, then it has to chill for a moment, and then when you open it up, you'll get that little that little ball, just like I mentioned a minute ago. And this is the right size. This ball is 0.490 inches in diameter. This pistol is 50 caliber. That means 0.50 inches in caliber, okay? That's where we get that. It refers directly to inches. Do you have any questions yet? Otherwise, I'm going to go to the mountain.
No questions yet.
Okay. So now we're going to try and shoot this flintlock pistol. Hopefully, with the wind and everything will work out today. This is a measuring flask. Excuse me while I set the gun down for just a moment. You see, this can be screwed out, and I can put a longer or a shorter one in. That way I get a measured charge. It really is best if you measure your charge. I know you've seen these pictures of in the movies where in an emergency they're just dumping that powder down the barrel. Well, that's not always the best idea. What they did have in the past, they actually had a way that they would measure a charge. They would put the bullet on the palm, pour powder on it, and when it barely covered the bullet, that was the right amount. But in this case, we're going to be putting 20 grains of powder in it. I've got a little push button here, turning it upside down, my finger at the end, I open the valve, the powder flows out, close the valve. I closed it a little too soon there. There, that should do it. And yes, I don't know if you can, hopefully you can see, I'm just going to put, there are a few of the grains of black powder that will go into the gun. It's a muzzle loader, right? So this goes into the gun itself. We're not going to use a real bullet. In fact, we really don't want to have burning embers flying around the place. So I'm going to take this little wad of paper. I'm actually going to wet it so that it won't come out as a burning ember. That then goes into the barrel here. And rather than using the ramrod in, I'm going to go ahead and use this loading ramrod here. Move it down to the bottom. Then open the frizzen. Expose the priming pan. This little flask is a real beauty. If I push on it, powder will actually come out of it. So I can lean it, put it right here inside the pan, and then just by pushing down on it, it opens the valve, a spring-loaded valve, and the powder comes in. I don't know if you can see the powder inside there now or not. There's a lot. When you fire a flintlock, there will always be a lag, a lapse in time between when the powder in the pan ignites and the powder in the main charge ignites. Normally I wouldn't want that much powder in here. I move a little closer here so hopefully everybody can get a better look at it. Closing now, there's the powder in the pan. It's at half cock all the way back. Now hopefully we'll get a good fire on it. It seems like such a simple thing, doesn't it? A rock, a piece of steel, and yet this is the technology, the lock technology of firearms that lasted longer than any other type of firing mechanism, including guns of today, the flintlock pistol. And so now I'm going to turn it over to my compatriot and friend here, Gordon Mark.
Larry, before we move on to Gordon, we have a couple of questions from our audience for you. Seems we might have a werewolf hunter among the audience. Someone's asking if we can make a silver bullet, or if you can make a silver bullet.
Could I? Yes.
Could you?
Simply by melting silver. I could put it inside of the mold there, and yes, I could. I guess. I've
Would
never
that
done
have
it,
been,
but I don't think there's any problem to the process.
Okay, so it may have just been that silver wasn't as easy to come by as lead.
Oh, silver's always been valuable. I mean, let's think back to the conquistadores first coming into Mexico in the mines at Zacatecas. Silver has always been a precious metal. Yeah, I know it's been romanticized in certain Western heroes, but it's not what you normally use for bullets.
Excellent. Thank you, Larry. Another question for you here was the flintlock pistol barrel rifled like the long rifle?
They were rifled and they were unrifled. This is unrifled, the blunderbuss that I have here. It's basically the forerunner of the shotgun. This pistol is rifled. Now, for anybody that's wondering what we're talking about, just in case, rifling simply means grooves, spiral grooves in the barrel that cause the bullet to spin as it comes out, producing a gyroscopic effect that gives stability to the bullet, and all that fancy talk, all it means is the bullet goes straighter.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Larry.
Okay, I'm going to move in close. Now, in 1807, a Scottish Presbyterian minister by the name of John Forsyth was hunting ducks. And he would see a duck, he would pull the trigger, the pan would flash, and as Larry said, there's a lag, and the ducks were out of here, and then the gun would go off. So not only was he a minister, he was also an inventor and a mechanic. He liked to do mechanical things. So he came up with a solution for a percussion primer. And I don't have the gun. They're very rare. They're very expensive. But I do have a photograph, and I'll show you how this works. This is called a scent bottle. All right, the front plate is taken off of the bottle. Okay, there's a large cavity here. You put fulminate of mercury in this. If you hit fulminate of mercury, it will explode. Now, to use this, you pull the hammer back, and there's a little spring-loaded firing pin right here. You turn the thing upside down. This feeds into this little groove right here, and there's a hole that goes back into the vent hole that goes back into the barrel, and that loads that. You turn it back down, and the gun is primed. It is loaded exactly the way a flintlock is. Now, the problem with this is 1807. It's before the Industrial Revolution, and these had to be handmade by a highly skilled gunsmith, which means, one, it took time to make them, two, they were very expensive. And so ultimately, you can see the hammer is elaborately carved. These are all used on very expensive hunting weapons. Now, It's an elegant solution. I really think this is cool, but it's a dead end. Now, there were a group of people, and I'm going to go back and pick a rifle off the counter here, the table. And this is a percussion rifle. And I'll tell you a little bit about the rifle itself in a minute, but I'm going to show you how the percussion system works. I'm not going to fire this. It'll be exactly the same as Larry did. But I am going to show you the percussion cap. Now, this was, a number of people worked on this solution. They wanted a single reusable or just a single use primer. And this is what they came up with. And I'm going to pull the hammer back, and there's a little, and this is either called a nipple or a cone. It's slightly tapered. And what I'm going to do is I have a little can of percussion primers here, and I will put a primer on here, and I will pop the primer. That saves me cleaning the gun when I get home. And I just dropped it. Now, these primers are slightly small for this nipple. I have arthritis. It's hard for me to manipulate these little things. Yeah.
We have a question for you. What happens if the primer gets wet?
Which?
The primer. What happens if the primer gets wet?
It doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
No.
All right.
Okay, no, so this is, the primer is now on there. I'll step a little closer. And this gun has a double set trigger. It's a high-end trigger. If I pull the front trigger, the gun will fire. If I pull the back trigger, it will set the trigger. You'll hear a little click, and it's adjustable. And then when you touch the trigger, sometimes it does that, the gun will fire. The reason for that is a lot of people, when they pull the trigger, they pull the gun off, and you miss the shot. Now, this particular rifle, we're talking about, Larry and I, in emails back and forth, we're talking about the West. In the East, they usually used the Kentucky long rifle. Has a very long barrel, has wood clear out to the end. They're either percussion or flintlock. And they're smaller caliber, 36 to 45 caliber. The military arms at the time, the French and the American were 69 caliber. The British muskets were 75 caliber. So 36 is pretty small. And as you move west, you're either in a wagon or on horse, and you need something that's not so awkward. Also, the game is bigger. So for the woodlands in the east, the Kentucky long rifle is adequate. And yes, Kentucky long rifles came west. You didn't just discard it and get another gun because you may not be able to afford it. Now this is called a plains rifle, or it's called a Hawken. It was named after two brothers, the Hawken brothers, who set up a gun shop in St. Louis, Missouri. And they said, we need a rifle for the plains. So this is what went west. Now, these were handmade. They were made off one at a time. They were very expensive. The characteristics are simple. Large caliber, this is 50 caliber. 50, 54 are the most popular calibers. There were some 45s and there were some larger, but 50, 54 was about it. Half stock, the double set trigger. Most were made in percussion. There were some people preferred some people preferred the flintlock. This little brass piece here is simply a little trap door you can put your percussion primers in. The original Hawken rifles had an iron butt plate. This is brass. Okay? Question.
We have a question. Is this trigger design that you're explaining to us, is this still something that's used in weapons today?
Yes. High-end guns. It's for military guns, you'll never see one on there. Okay. Now, if I would continue on with the muzzleloader, all I'm going to be doing is repeating what Larry said. So what I would like to do is to go down a little different avenue into a period of time in the middle of the 19th century and give you a little different historical take on black powder guns. And I'm going to leave you with while I go back and get the next gun, I'm going to leave you with a problem. The Springfield Arsenal, which is the government arsenal, had just manufactured, this is 1843, had just manufactured 30,000 69 caliber smooth bore. The military likes smooth bores. They load fast, and they're less apt to have black powder fouling. They were flintlocks. There is no rear sight. You now have, and basically it's the same gun that mid-18th century French pattern muskets were. These were brought to the colonies for the American Revolution. And it's basically the same gun. So it's kind of obsolete. So I'm going to leave you with that problem. Question.
We have two questions for you. What is the recoil on a gun like that, like the one you're holding? And the second question, you're talking about guns that are popular in the West. When did the Colt come into the gun scene?
Normally, when Larry and I do this, I have a Colt revolver. The original Colt revolver was called a Patterson revolver, and it didn't sell well. It put Colt into bankruptcy, and so that's in the 1830s. And it was a percussion gun. During the Civil War, both Colt, Remington, and a number of other manufacturers made six-shot Colt revolvers. After the war, Remington patented a bored-through cylinder, so they just cut the end of the cylinder off and chambered it for cartridges, and they took a patent out on it, and everybody was looking at, now how can we get around this patent? But yeah, as for the recoil, depends on how much powder you put in it. I will say this. This is not a very comfortable, it looks cool, but it's not very comfortable to shoot. So a lighter load is probably better. If you're hunting, if you're going to shoot a bear or something, you want to put a lot of powder in this. Let me go get the other gun. You think about the problem, and we'll come to the next one. Now, this is the solution. This is, the lock plate says 1843, so that's when it was made. And this originally was a flintlock. And this is one of the converted guns. Now, there were three entities that converted them. The Arsenal, this was converted by the Arsenal, the Springfield Arsenal. Two independent contractors converted them. The conversions were all different. This is the simplest one. Now, this is all they did. They took the gun apart. They took the lock plate off. The frizzen, the little thing that Larry showed you that goes back and forth, and the spring are held on with screws. That comes off. The pan is held on with screws from the back. So they took those off. They added, because of the hole here, a little groove here, they added this piece of brass. And they added a percussion hammer. Okay? The barrel has a vent hole in it. It's plugged, and then a little lump is welded or brazed onto, and then the nipple or cone is put on it. This is bigger than the one I show you. The military muskets have really big ones. Now, just some, a little interesting, most percussion hammers are hollow. The reason for that is when you fire the percussion cap, it's supposed to disintegrate. It splits, it fragments, and your face is right there. You don't want that coming in your face. So what happens then is the hammer covers that. So it's just a safety element. Now, this is 69 caliber. It's smooth bore. And the only difference is now a percussion gun. There is no rear sight on this. Now, when I talked about the Hawk and I said they were very expensive, you're going west and you can't afford one. So what they did, these were issued out for, what happened was these were issued out for troops at the beginning of the Civil War, just as a substitute standard until they could get the rifled, 58 caliber rifled muskets out. And what they would do is they put these out on the civilian market. And what they would do is they'd cut them off right here, the stock, not the barrel. Okay? They sometimes would solder a little ferrule on there to hold the ramrod. Now what you have is a shotgun. So if you're going west, you have a shotgun for small game, birds. If you need something bigger, you put a 69 caliber ball in it. Okay? Now, question.
Yes, we're wondering, can you explain a little bit more what you mean when you say conversion?
Okay, conversion means, and this is what I'm going to talk about, this is what I want to talk about because this only exists from 1843 to 1873. Prior to that, they didn't do it, and after that, they didn't do it. They took an existing firearm and changed it into the next system. So this is originally a flintlock, now it's a percussion gun. And so the next one will be a percussion gun that's changed to a cartridge gun. At the end of the Civil War, and I'm going to go pick up another rifle here. And this is basically a Civil War musket, okay? And if you put your hand over the breech block, it looks just like one, okay? Now, at the end of the Civil War, they were using single-shot cartridge, metallic cartridges like we do now. They were using, this is heavy, they were using repeating rifles with cartridges, and the military knew they had to go to a cartridge-fired gun. So what they did was they say, here's a set of parameters. This is what we want. If you come up with something we like, we'll give you a really good contract. So, the parameters are, it has to be single shot. The military didn't like repeating rifles because they felt soldiers would waste the ammunition. The other was, they had on hand approximately 1 million, a lot of guns, 1 million 58 caliber Springfield muskets in percussion. They said you got to use it, you got to convert those. So this is one of the conversions. Now, the lock plate on this is 1864, although it's a pattern 1863 Springfield. And this was, and instead of Springfield here, it says Bridesburg. Bridesburg is an independent contractor. And what they did, this is the simplest one. What they did was they simply cut the barrel off here, attached the breech block, and altered the hammer. Now, this works like this. This is kind of a cool little knob. I think this is really cool. You open this up like this. It's a little gate. You put the cartridge in there. If it has an extractor, so if you fire the cartridge, it'll pop out. You close it, and you'll notice the hammer has this long little thing here. And when that goes down, that locks the gate. And that looks pretty flimsy to me. The military thought it was too. This was rejected. So what Bridesburg did was they just made a bunch of them. They were sold on the civilian market. There are not many of these out there. Okay? Now, let's go to another one.
Gordon, about how much do those weapons weigh? You mentioned that they're heavy.
8 or 9 pounds.
8 or 9 pounds. Thank you.
And the people were a lot smaller. Now, at the same time, at the Springfield Arsenal, the head armorer by the name of Erskine Allen. Now, his name is spelled A-L-L-I-N if you look it up. He came up with the first Allen conversion. The military, they accepted a lot of them. They field tested them, didn't like them. He came up with the second Allen conversion. They actually kind of like those with reservations, and they were issued out to troops for field tests. This is the third Allen conversion. And this is a little more complex. Okay, one, the barrel is cut down and it's shorter. Okay, so the stock has to be reconfigured. They didn't want 58 caliber anymore. They wanted something smaller. So what he did, and this is not that uncommon in the firearms industry, rather than make a whole new barrel, they just reamed the rifling out of the 58 caliber and put a sleeve in it. And if you look at the end of some of these, you can see the little line where it goes around. Now, this works this way. You pull the hammer back, and right here is a little lever. You lift it up. These are called trapdoors. I'm sure the government has a name for them, but they're called trapdoors, and everybody knows what a trapdoor is. Again, the cartridge is put in here. This is, the insert was in the barrel was 50 caliber. This fires a 50-70 bullet. That means it's 50 caliber, it's a ½ inch in diameter, and uses 70 grains of black powder. Okay, you see this little notch right here? This fits right down in there, right? That little notch is from the muzzleloader. They didn't change the lock. And all they did to the hammer was mill off the cup. So this is 58 caliber, and yeah, okay. This was, the lock plate says 1863. Up here it says 1870. So this was converted in 1870. And what I want to do now is show you the difference. The 5070 was in use from 1866 to 1873, at which time it was replaced by a scaled down version of the trapdoor in 4570, and it's a little smaller. Just some useless trivia. This is a 5070 cartridge. This is a dummy. This is a modern case. There's no primer in it. There's no powder in it. The bullet is the correct bullet, but it was cast in a modern mold. But this is what it is. This became the most popular cartridge in various rifles for buffalo hunters. So this is the one they use, mostly because they were available. Now, the 4570 cartridge, and I'll hold them up together, looks like this. It's a little narrower and a little longer. Now, I don't know if this is a live round or not. The date on it says 1286. That's 1886. So this cartridge is probably 135 years old. It probably has black powder in it, and whether it would actually fire or not, I don't know. I don't intend to try and find out. The 4570s stayed in use from 73 to the middle 1890s. And when they were replaced by a 30-40 Craig, which was a 30 caliber smokeless round, the Craig rifle was a 5-shot bolt action rifle. Both were used side by side in the Spanish-American War. After that, they were again sent down to the National Guard units. They were sold on the civilian market, and whatever. Anyway, that sort of ends our sojourn in the black powder. If you have more questions, ask them really quick. I'm going to turn this back over to Laura, and she can close this out.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Larry. Thank you all so much for that wonderful demonstration and the history about historic firearms. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you all learned something. If there's any questions, go ahead and put those in the comments. We can either get to them now or we can go back and answer those for you later. Just a couple of reminders. We're doing these Golondrinas live sessions about once every week or once every 2 weeks. Make sure to check on our social media pages, on our Facebook and our Instagram, both at SF Golondrinas. And of course, go to our website for information on what's going on. As I mentioned, we've been closed the majority of our season, but we were able to open at limited capacity recently. So if you get on our website, there's information about how you can come and walk around and enjoy the site and enjoy a picnic. You can see behind us here the beautiful cottonwoods are starting to get little bits of yellow, so it's a really lovely time of year to be out here. So don't forget, your adventure starts at golondrinas.org. Make sure to keep up with us. And thanks so much for spending some time with us on this beautiful Friday afternoon. Stay safe, be well, and enjoy the weekend, everybody. Thanks so much for your support. Bye-bye.